Right. Hello, everyone. Good morning and welcome to this morning's webinar. I hope everyone managed to get a decent night's sleep. I have to admit it was a bit too hot for my liking. So yeah, please help yourselves, get as much coffee as you need. But once again, thank you very much for joining today. Just to double check, if you can just let me know if you can hear and see me okay. Just a quick test. Good, right. So welcome. Today is all about optimizing e-commerce experiences, as you can clearly see here. This is a part of our series that we've been running over the last couple of months, where we've been helping various brands in various industries really try to focus and identify these newfound opportunities that have come about ever since the pandemic. Because as we all know, it's all been a very tricky and challenging time. But I think there's been quite a lot of brands who have been able to benefit from this as well. And what we like to come in to help brands do is really capitalize on those opportunities and consequently kind of grow your customer lifetime value from now and for the sort of rest of the year to come. So my name is Joel Mounsey. I'm head of commercial growth here at House of Kaizen. And I'm joined here today by the rest of this lovely gang. We've got Nick Gassman, Research Manager, and Osh Rice, Business Director, both at House of Kaizen. And we're also joined here today by Eoghan Beecher, Digital Fundraising Manager at Shelter, who's our good friend and one of our clients. So thank you everyone for joining today. And just to touch on as well what we will be sort of discussing today, I'll be taking you through kind of some initial thoughts and setting the scene on what's next for e-commerce. Nick will be taking you through customer purchasing behavior during these uncertain times and how we can actually use research to identify those opportunities and insights. Then lastly, Osh and Eoghan will be taking you through how you yourself as a brand marketer can start to look at how you can build an experimentation business case. And finally, a Q&A, which on this point, please feel free as we go along to ask any questions. I get a little notification at the bottom of my screen, so I'll see them pop up. So I may look to ask those questions maybe at the end of each section or group them up towards the end, but we'll see how we get on. But please ask away anything that you want, and yeah, we'll be more than happy to answer. Right, for those of you who don't know who we are, I won't talk about us too much, but just briefly. House of Kaizen, we are specialists in what we call digital experience optimization, which in a nutshell, that is all about the unification and the optimization of all of your digital customer touchpoints. And we bring those together to make sure that you create journeys that actually convert. Hope that makes sense, but we've been doing this for about a good 17 years or so. And in our name, Kaizen, which is Japanese for continuous improvement, so it's very much our ethos. We've got a presence both in New York and London. We've worked globally for many brands with different geographic locations, which has also made us experts in localization in different languages and localization as well. We're a smallish team, very family sized, kind of like a family kind of culture, 30 plus passionate employees, made up of our research team, consumer insights, our strategy and optimization, design and UX, tech, and many other teams as well. And we all bring that together to help provide what we call digital experience optimization. And some brands and clients who have benefited by working with us, as you can see here, Wall Street Journal, Shelter, who've got Eoghan joining us here today, SoundCloud, BlackBerry, McAfee. We have quite a big focus within the publishing sector, as well as SaaS and finance. But also, if we group us all together, we have quite a sort of a big kind of presence within the subscription kind of sector as well. Cool. So, to set the scene for the rest of the webinar and some initial thoughts on what's next for e-commerce, because as we all know, it's been quite a dramatic time, I think probably since the start of March, and consumer behavior just shifted overnight. And there's been brands who have benefited, and there's been quite a lot of brands that haven't. But for the ones that have, and the ones that do have quite a good opportunity, potential to see this through for the rest of the year and the years to come. What we've found is quite a few brands haven't, although the sales and traffic have gone up, they've still missed out on conversion opportunities. So that's what really we're taking you through today. And then really trying to help you guys start to see how you can look at optimizing end-to-end the customer journey to seek out those opportunities and not just focus on the initial transaction and the acquisition, but how do you get those customers coming back? So that's where we believe growth comes from. A couple of examples that it's not all doom and gloom for the rest of the year. So checking out eConsultancy, a recent report they did with Rakuten. 3/4 of global consumers are not planning to reduce spending during Christmas 2020. So obviously that is very much the fortunate bunch of the population, but still it's quite a promising statistic to think about for the rest of this year, for those who have a big push for Christmas campaigns, as well as Black Friday, as well as you can see, over half are still looking to make a purchase for Black Friday. So I think the impact the pandemic has had on the population in general hasn't had too much of the effect that we might have thought it may have had on disposable income and stuff like that. And then an example as well, B&Q and Screwfix. I think B&Q in particular, with the crazy weather that's been going on, I think everyone's been going gardening mad and barbecue mad. But as we can see, they've seen tremendous growth, especially if you look at the statistic down below, online sales grew by 183%, which I think shows us the importance of online and e-commerce, but it still has a stronghold over kind of the more high street retail and more customers going in store. So something definitely worth to think about, and what we are here today to really help you identify opportunities to see similar amounts of growth as well. And some examples of what you shouldn't do. And I spotted this at the start of the pandemic, and I think I had a similar reaction to that baby over there, where if you don't listen to your customers, you don't give them what they want, it can really go back on you hard. Because the brand reputation BT Sport had after this incident did not go down for them well. And now what we're finding is there was a high churn rate, which is fair enough. Obviously, there wasn't much sport going on and they should have facilitated that need, but now they're not seeing those customers come back. So that's where over 3 months, you can see such a change in consumer shift, and always brands need to be agile and adapt, be there ready. Which looks similar to this, where BT Sport weren't close enough to their customers, weren't really listening to what they were saying, and they weren't ready. And really to focus on today, and excuse my amazing graphic design skills, what we want to try and do is bridge that gap to make sure that you're always listening to the voice of the customer. And then touch on here, which is the more you're able to listen, understand, execute on the correct strategies, align to the voices of your customers, you will grow and you will thrive. So it's all about continuation. Always do your research, always gather insights, always test and experiment. And the most important factor is here, continuously learn how to provide value. So on that note, I think that sets the scene for you, Nick. Would you like to take over and show us what you got on the research side of things and the customer purchasing behavior?
Thanks, Joel. I'll just try and pick the right screen to share. And hope so. Can you see that?
Yeah, all good.
Great. So, hello world. I do hope everyone has access to a cold towel to wrap around their heads at the moment, and keep your brains functioning. So, talking about this purchasing behaviour in uncertain times, and it's there we go. So what are we going to be talking about? So briefly, how and why you can take a fresh look at customers and products and services when they're affected in stressful times, and using psychological segmentation to do that, and what it actually means for specific marketing strategies. So we keep using this phrase uncertain times, and I think it's something that we would all recognise. But yes, there is an economic downturn. Every day there seems to be more bad news for people. And the chart on the left there, depressing to see the drop in 2020. Good to see generally there are forecasts that, you know, the uptick will be coming back, but at the same time, the timescales for that are uncertain. So companies, some companies have already gone under, others are asking themselves whether they'll survive or not. And what I would be encouraging people to think about is not just the state of the company, but to underline what Joel was talking about, is what is the relationship with your customers going to look like when you come out of the end of the tunnel. And there are many papers, many bits of research that have been done that show that companies that do focus on the customer do outperform the market and are in better shape than those that don't. And this is my favorite simplistic formula for success in business. But in order to be able to give customers what they want and to present it in the way that they want, you need to know who your customer is. You need to understand them. So the question becomes, how do you do that? And so everyone in general is going to be, when I say everyone, most people in business are going to have an idea about traditional demographic customer segmentations, and that's fine and necessary, and we still need to do some of that. But it needs to go alongside, I think, a deeper psychological understanding of the customer. And over the last few years, there have been many advances in research around the psychology of customers, of nudges, of influencing of how we think. And if that's an area that any of you are interested in getting into and understanding better, these are the 4 books that, for what it's worth, I would recommend as a really good starting point. And so the psychological understanding of customer, and then these methods give you tools on how to talk to those customers and influence. And one thing I think sometimes gets missed when we're at work and looking at our spreadsheets of results and all the numbers, we kind of lose sight of the fact that the emails that we've sent, the campaign that we're running, the A/B testing that we're doing, they're all psychological experiments, because what you're seeking to do is to influence the behavior of your customers. And so the better you understand the psychology of your customers, then the better campaigns you can run, the better hypotheses you can come up with for your tests. So what I'm going to very briefly run you through now is some research done by Quelch and Jocks that was published in the Wall Street Journal a few years back that looks at customer segments in a downturn and their attitudes to products. And they came up with 4 segments. The slam on the brakes, and these are the people that I think of who've lost their jobs and they just don't have that discretionary spend that they had before. There are the people that I think of that are worried about their jobs. They don't know if they're going to keep the job. They need to batten down the hatches, hope to come out okay later on. And the people that I hope I'm talking to today, excuse me, who, as it says, comfortably well off, but you're still aware of what's going on out there, still a little bit of caution potentially in spending. And then there are the people, typically younger, who say, oh, I'm going to spend the money that I've got. Again, typically they're after experiences necessarily rather than goods, with the particular exception of consumer electronics. And in looking at how those consumers view the different product categories that they're going to spend money on, again, there are 4 of those. So there are the things that we all need, so those large piles of toilet roll and the toilet roll shortages. But bear in mind that products can move in these categories. And so who would have thought a year ago that hand sanitizer would be an essential purchase for many people? So again, reflect upon your own products and services and think about, are they going to have moved categories, and which of those psychological profiles will they have moved for? Because that's going to then impact how you market and sell to those people and potentially your pricing. So we have these 4 categories. So obviously you can draw then a 4x4 matrix, which we all love our matrices in business. We've just taken a slightly different way of presenting it here to look at how the different categories will prioritize their purchases. So slam on the brakes have very little discretion and maybe a small degree of discretion around treats, and we'll have a look at what that means in a second. And for the pained but patient, again, treats, and they're going to be, so the slab on the brakes will be just focused on price. Pain but patient will be as well, but a little bit more flexibility, looking a bit more at quality as well. Whereas the comfortably well off are going to be looking along that scale, are always, again, wanting quality, just wondering a bit, should I buy something a bit cheaper? And the live for today, again, are going to be looking at what's going to contribute to their lifestyles. And so in terms of the marketing tactics that you would adopt, so for the essential products, for those slam on the brakes and the pain but patient, you are looking at price and emphasis on price. But don't forget that it's about price perception and clearly related to actual price. But those psychological techniques give you ways and methods of affecting the perception of price without necessarily adjusting price per se. And essential products for the top 2 segments are pretty much keep doing what you're doing. And the treat, so, you know, in desperate times, treats take on outsize focus, and we all need our treats more when things are really tough. So are there ways, if you're selling a product or service, that you can offer smaller portions? Loyalty schemes come into it as well, and it's an opportunity potentially to compare your product with competitors and emphasize the benefits of your product, lower price, higher quality than your competitors. And the treats for the higher categories, you know, again, it's about quality. You can remove friction by doing subscriptions, and maybe for them it's potentially less about the luxury holiday in the Maldives, and maybe something closer to home might be something that influences their thinking. For the postponables, there's not much you can do for the lower categories. Maybe buy now, pay later, layaway type plans can have a role to play in that. And just for the higher categories there in postponables, it's you know, you don't want to miss out, and again, appealing to quality of life and experience. Not much you can do for the slam on the brakes and the pain but patient with the expendables, but don't ignore them entirely, because you don't know, they may become customers one day and you still want their awareness of your brand and your product. And for the expendables, for the top categories, for the comfortably well off, they, you know, a discretion, they don't want to be seen to be flaunting it, but equally well, they want to impress their neighbours. And the live for today's is where the main opportunity to promote products here. So at the end, the question becomes, so that's all very well, but how do I actually find out which segments my customers belong to, and where do our products and services fit in those scales. And so these ideas come not from the article, but these are some potential survey questions that we have come up with to try and identify those segments. I'm not going to read them out to you, but in principle, you could do something like run a survey, talk to your customers, interview them to see which categories they fall into. And you're asking them here about themselves and then how they would categorize your products and services. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you, Nick. I've got a question come in for you. I think it might be good just to ask it now. Let me just double check. Yes. So I think this question, so I was reading it again. Cool. So it's asking about time frame to really try and get marketing teams into a state of readiness since the pandemic. And obviously now we're looking at completely new criteria and sort of buying behaviors. But obviously you have to be prepared and ready to identify these new segments. Do you have like an estimated time frame of how long you think this process might take?
As to how long it would take to understand your customers, I think it doesn't necessarily have to take very long to get a first handle on it, because you could quickly run up a survey and put it live on your website, for example. You could be asking the same sort of surveys in stores, getting people to walk around with clipboards at a safe distance. You could be talking to the people in your customer database. So I think all of that you could pretty quickly get a handle on it. I mean, like within a few weeks. And then as the information comes in, you start to build out the picture, and then you can start to get a bit more sophisticated and a bit more clever segmentation and dig into it with follow-up surveys and questions.
Okay. Yeah, because I think obviously like the main point here is being able to identify these new behaviors and characteristics. And obviously there's a stage of identifying those, but then actually implementing or executing on them. Whether you do new email campaigns or new forms of personalization, stuff like that. So no, just curious, and obviously the question here, curious about, typically, are we talking about weeks?
Yeah, I think with the implementation, it's going to depend what you find out and what your product or service is as to, how quickly you can turn the ship around. But sometimes, again, a lot of this, bear in mind, is about perception. And so you can fairly quickly start to change your customer communications to affect that perception, even before you can actually affect product and pricing.
Mm-hmm. Good. All right, thank you. Hope that answers your question. Right, I believe it's over to Osh and Owen. Just so you know, you're both on mute. Osh?
Yeah, sorry guys. When everything minimizes at the same time, you're kind of like, what do I do? What do I do? All right, perfect. So, yeah, great. So listen, Owen and I are going to talk you through some of the work we've done for Shelter over the last year and a half. The reality of this is building a business case for experimentation. So for a lot of businesses, there is a renewed focus on efficiency driving measures. Budgets are a lot scarcer than they were at the beginning, certainly at the beginning of the year. And so you have to work a lot harder to be able to build an effective business case to look at something like experimentation and testing, where you don't have as clear an idea of what your ROI is going to be than you would from putting driving budget into paid social, into paid search, into other channels which are sort of tried and trusted. So what we're going to take you through today is a way that we worked on with Owen to give him the kind of confidence and in experimentation within the business to be able to build that case, to be able to get a scalable sort of ROI for testing. and to look at de-risking experimentation through the application of both data and research insights to really give you a much clearer understanding of the validity and the certainty of success of the sort of testing experimentation that you're working on. So what I'll do is I'll hand over to Owen. He can give you a bit more sort of background into what you're about. I'm sure you guys know a lot of them about already, but sort of what they're about and the sort of background to all of this work, and then we can go into the sort of the nuts and bolts of what we actually did.
Sure. So I guess I'll start off. Thanks very much, Josh. I'll start off by giving a quick 30,000 foot view of Shelter. We are one of the largest housing and homelessness charities in the UK. We help millions of people every year through frontline advice and support, through legal services, and also through activities surrounding campaigning, so ensuring that we're working to put pressure on governments, councils and everything like that to take long-term measures to ensure that housing conditions are improved both legally and in terms of direct provision. Our challenge in this process was to look at how we improve our fundraising channels, both in terms of on-site performance, but also what that does to allow us to grow exponentially in other areas. Osh, I don't have control of the deck, so do you want to just flick to the next slide? Perfect. So I guess just to give a little bit of background on where we were at, we were seeing a situation where, from a digital marketing perspective, we were struggling to grow a lot of our paid media channels because we were hitting inflection points and reaching points of diminishing returns, and particularly surrounding the likes of paid search and social, which were very key areas of acquisition and scalability for us, but weren't proving to be profitable. So we came, by looking at some of the data we had, we came to the conclusion that a lot of the issue here was around people who wanted to donate to us, but for some reason within that process were turned off throughout that. So we very much looked at how to improve that, and then how to grow our overall optimization strategy off that basis. In terms of a cultural history of the organization, we very much did a lot of stuff in-house. So our work with House Kaizen was kind of the first time we'd gone external to do projects like this. But we also had a culture of I guess, A/B testing the better option rather than coming at these problems with the assumption that something is wrong and trying to find what's wrong and find pain points and find abandonment points. So that was very much the first attitude. And as Osh said, it's very difficult, you know, at this time for a lot of businesses, and a lot of people here will understand that it's very difficult to invest in long-term projects now because there's economic downturn. Let me tell you, for a charity, it's always very difficult to invest in long-term projects. So what we needed to be able to do was balance out immediate wins with the ability to then ask bigger questions. So Ash, if you want to jump on to the next one, I'll go through the first strategy. So we very much looked at quick wins and bug fixes first, which was very much investigatory of our donation funnel. So looking at, as I said, those points on that funnel where people who, for all intents and purposes, had come in with the notion of making a donation to us, but at some point in that process were turned off. And one of the key things we hypothesized was that there was breakages. Now, what we needed to do was find where those breakages were and look at it from a very much consumer-led or donor-led position. That led to some, you know, very interesting things that hadn't been hypothesized, but also it led to some confirmation of things that we certainly knew didn't make sense on site, but we needed to prove that they were actively causing people to lose their place, to lose process, and ultimately to decide not to donate to us, which was super, super important. And as I say, we'll go into results a little bit later, but what this allowed us to do was create a quick win that immediately produced return on investment and immediately got us into the point where we could say, actually, optimization is a profitable activity. Here's the proof. And what that led us to do is then work deeper with House of Kaizen to look at their optimization roadmap, which Josh can explain the methodology for now.
Yeah, so I mean, we'll go into the sort of roadmap a little bit in more detail, but what these were sort of tests and experiments which will stem from the research and insights that we delivered, that are a little bit more complex, so not necessarily suitable for implementation in-house. It does need a more sort of comprehensive skill set to be able to get this stuff across the line. In particular, translating a lot of the kind of insights around customers into a test which is going to be successful is kind of the magic mix. That is the hard part, and then then translating that strategy into design and build at scale and with velocity. That's something that a lot of organizations will struggle to deal with. So that's definitely where we could have come in. We'll look at that prioritization of those insights, building those insights into tests, and then owning those testing tracks in alignment with Shell's internal team. So to start off with how we went about this, Nick's our sort of go-to guy for research, but user research is the critical ingredient. A lot of businesses are working too much on quantitative data and assumptions, which gives you a lot of what customers are doing, but it doesn't really tell you why they're doing that. And with if you start to ask your customers, you start to observe what they're doing, but really get that qualitative data on why customers are doing what they're doing, what they were looking for, why was it that they almost converted, why did they drop off, why didn't they scroll down to the bottom of the screen, why we start to get the insights as to what that behavioral and attitudinal kind of processes for a lot of customers. And in terms of testing, it's super important because when you incorporate user research into your optimization tests and experiments, we see a 65% uplift in conversion rate, but on a test which is based on analytics and kind of opinions versus a test which is based on your user data, but also the research and insights, and a significant increase in the amount of winning tests. So a benchmark for an optimization program is that you should be looking at between 20 and 40% of all your tests should be green, i.e. there should be statistical significance, there should be a winning variation there. And what you're doing really by adding that layer of attitudinal and behavioral research, you're starting to amplify the effect of your testing and give you a lot more certainty, i.e. de-risking your testing and optimization program. When we look at research, there's a lot of different kind of levers that we can pull, depending on the client, depending on the circumstances, and depending on what the objective is. So for Shelter in particular, we looked at a user interaction study using session camps. That's looking at sort of click maps, scroll depth, what users are actually doing on the site. Again, that sort of it's quantitative data, so we can mesh that alongside Google Analytics and start to match that to different campaigns, different channels, different devices. We'll also use something called remote usability testing. So it's literally watching a user perform a particular task. So for Shelter, we looked at testers who had a history of donating to charities, and we asked them to essentially, go half of them to go through putting a single one-off donation, and the other half to look at giving a regular giving. That's like a monthly giving subscription, if you will. And both their facial, but also what they're doing on screen was recorded, and that gives you a lot of insight into why people are behaving in the way they are right at that moment. You often see something with something like Session Cam, you'll say, oh God, why does someone do that? Remote usability testing gives you the opportunity to ask those questions and and receive those insights. And naturally also then sort of overlaying all that onto sort of the GA data and customer data gives us a really broad picture of customer actions, some really actionable insights, and a high degree of certainty that any test that we're going to be performing will result in a statistically significant result. So I'll hand over to Eoghan. He could talk us through some of the quick wins and bug fixes that him and his team looked to implement off the back of the research.
Sure. I guess one of the key things, as I mentioned earlier, we wanted to do was understand just where this point of abandon is and what is causing issues. So we looked at, as again, the heat mapping and click data as one of the key points that we were looking through. Primarily, it was an issue for calls to action not making sense for users and not producing a journey that users expected. So as you can see in some of the visuals there, we had things like a constant header component which had a donate button on it. Now this was something that existed perennially across the whole site, but it didn't produce a click to checkout. From a donation landing point of view, it produced a donation lander. So what we were finding there quite significantly was that it was creating a level of entropy, a a loop for people. So they were coming on site, clicking that donate button, and it was bringing them back to the same page, and they were either assuming that the site was broken or that there was something wrong on their side, and it was increasing that chance of abandon. What that did as a secondary principle was also pointed out that on mobile, that click and that entrophic position increases massively. So if they are accessing our site on a device that pushes the main call to action below the fold. And this was something that I guess from a principle of design that wasn't being considered enough, that on a content site, so our site is very much, 99% of the site is advice content, because there's lots and lots of heavy housing advice and legal advice and things that we have to issue, which all is very much based on engagement, whereas our donation pages are based on direct response, on high intent, on getting people to make a donation in as seamless and as quick a way possible. So this principle of scroll depth and everything like that wasn't necessarily working in the same way for users of the donation funnel than it was for users of the rest of our website. In this perspective, what this piece of bug fixing effectively proved was that we started needing to consider where our reading panes existed on our donation page on a much bigger level. So it's not only a case that we said, okay, let's remove this donate button that's causing abandons. That increases our revenue straight off the bat. But let's also look at what that means for general design principles in future, which is really, really important. And what that allowed us to look at was how each of these actionable insights that were produced from this allowed us to create principles for the long term. So we created a prioritized list of 20 actionable insights, obviously, some being much more significant and much more, much heavier in terms of usage and abandons than others, and started gradually implementing these things to ensure that the site was functioning a lot better, that it was a lot clearer to people, and that it worked on a lot more significant basis. What that meant was a significant increase in revenue, which proved that hypothesis that people are coming in with a high level of intent, that they want to make a donation, and it's the usability or functionality element that's stopping them from doing so. There are some numbers there in terms of our ROI based on what we paid for this project and the uplift on donations and the earnings per click that we had. But what isn't considered is the physical money that it's worth to us, which is something that's hugely significant. So we segmented what we considered to be the highest group of intent on our inbound traffic, which is brand search, which is effectively somebody telling Google, I want to donate to shelter. And those people should have the lowest abandon rate and should have the highest earnings per click. Isolating one Christmas campaign against the previous year, we estimated an increase in revenue based on no change in spend whatsoever, no other change in conditions apart from these bug fixes on the landing page. Our revenue increased by 120,000 for that budget line alone. So that's before we consider what impact all of these changes have on the broader, more casual and colder audience channels. That's a six-figure increase on fixing a few buttons, making things a bit easier to click, putting a bit more focus above the fold, and ultimately confirming principles that we're all kind of broadly aware of, but absolutely need that proof and that understanding to be able to action them. And that's hugely impactful for the results of this work, how it creates this as an ongoing work stream in the future. So how, as we mentioned earlier, we use those bug fixes to say, okay, well, optimization is now a really, really valuable channel for us. How do we look at research as a key work stream for the future? And ultimately, the bottom line is how many people we can help. If it takes £10 to answer a phone call of somebody in need of housing help, that's 12,000 people extra we've been able to help based on this work alone.
Awesome, and I think that's, to Owen's point, it's a really useful kind of addition. Is when you look at this sort of work, when you're looking at that sort of customer insights and road mapping, a part of that would always be those sort of quick wins, and often the value of those quick wins pays for the entire project, irrespective of your longer term experimentation. And that's, and that in and of itself is super valuable. And I think also the quick turnaround of that. I mean, these projects typically looking at between sort of 4, 6, 8 weeks from start to end. And that sort of turnaround can be really valuable to proving the case of, yes, this is a channel that we need to look at investing more in, because there is a significant amount of scale there. So I want to quickly talk you through some of the wider kind of experimentation that we did, how we go about that, and what the results were. So first of all, in terms of our optimization strategy, it really falls on 5 key pillars, which is value proposition, incentivization, anxiety, friction, and price. All the standard sort of stuff. But when that's reinforced with that customer understanding that I've been banging on about all the entire time, it gives you a lot more precision in where your areas of focus is. So, how do you align the insights that we have with these 5 core pillars and create an experience which is going to be pleasurable but also engaging for customers? And also, where is your prioritization? So you can look at, okay, well, look, the important thing is let's focus on checkout, because that's obviously where we've got a significant amount of drop off. We can, the data shows us that. But the way that we would look at it is, well, actually, let's look at landing page. Let's look at that collateral where people are arriving first, because if you can increase the volume coming through to the checkout and then optimize the checkout, that's gonna have a significant impact on your revenue, on uplift, and essentially the output of that second test looking at checkout or cart. Very briefly, so we looked to start off with the landing page. Data said that 7 out of 10 users felt the page didn't really appeal. The user testing highlighted that users want to know where their money is going and how it is being used. That it didn't really resonate too much with the creative. A lot of the content was below the fold. And which was really important because a lot of the search results indicates that users were looking to make a difference, and they didn't really feel that the content and the value prop were giving them that sort of I get that feeling that they were looking for in terms of donating. So what we did is to create a variation for both the desktop and mobile, which featured new imagery, which was more sort of with positive statements, sort of making a difference, making you feel safe and secure. We adjusted the color scheme a little bit, and this can often be an interesting one, especially with a brand that's got a very specific palette. But when that palette isn't really helping to reinforce your content from a visual and engagement and conversion point of view, you do have to make some tweaks, which does often have mean having quite a grown-up conversation with your brand team. We'd like to introduce radio buttons for donation amounts, and bringing your choose your own donation in line. So this is really looking at what is the key thing we want people to do on this page, which is donate. Let's make that as easy as possible. And the data really sort of back that up. Increasing contrast, looking at changing the images on the masthead, removing less emotionally appealing content. And putting that further down the page, and incorporating the R vision, essentially the huge amount of value prop into that masthead, so that as soon as people are arriving, they know what to expect. They know why they're there. There's a lot more engagement. We've really brought those elements that people want to, that potential supporters want to see immediately, to the fore. And that's so what we did is we ran an A/B test with these different variations. And Owen, maybe you want to talk us through the results that you saw.
Yeah, so this is, and I guess what's really positive about this is we're talking about doing a piece of testing and a piece of experimentation that's also immediately profitable on day one, which is not something we can always expect from every piece of work we've always done. We saw an enormous uplift in donation value, particularly on mobile, which was one of the big target areas for us. We know that, I guess, the functionality and intent based on day parts on desktop is very strong anyway. It tends to be a lot of people donating between the hours of 9 to 5, people donating from their offices, a lot of kind of, I guess, very warm donors in the sense that we have people using that site that are coming from corporates, that are coming from places that have been pre-engaged. So mobile was the big area where we saw a need to grow. And what this type of work allowed us to do was both increase the general donation value by getting rid of kind of anchor amounts that weren't useful and weren't being used, and push people up into a donation that they're more comfortable with and is more valuable to us, looking at a massive uplift in revenue, but also an increase in conversion rate. And ultimately that's the big thing, that we've always assumed or worked under the assumption that every point of inflection we've always hit has been because for some reason people who have some degree of intent to donate haven't been able to for a reason of friction or functionality or potentially not engaging properly with creative and value proposition. And seeing an increase in conversion rate means we're getting more people into the funnel. So it's not just a case of, banking everything on more valuable donations, but also ensuring that there's a higher volume of people coming in, which means more long-term support. And ultimately, that incremental value grows massively when we consider what lifetime value of a donor is. In terms of the actionable insight from this type of a project, it lets us know what our audience are thinking on a much deeper level. It combines that quote-unquote problem of data and signaling not necessarily marrying up together and produces something that builds a user story considering both areas and allows us to be much more intelligent about how we design things in the future, but also considers, I guess, quite divergent user stories in terms of what people want. We are somewhat restricted in terms of our creative and value proposition. Obviously, as a charity, our value proposition has to be quite strictly regulated. But from our creative perspective, as a charity, we always use real people. We don't use actors. So sometimes it's quite restrictive in terms of how we present photographs, how we present case studies, and how we present content. What this has also allowed us to do is create a very, I guess, broad tapestry of what users want to see, what they respond very well to, which has led to us briefing our case studies team and our brand team about who they engage, what type of photography is taken, and brought this type of digital conversion rate optimization thinking to much earlier parts of the organization that previously we would have drastically struggled to be able to do. And now we have a perspective where fundraising is working a lot more intelligently on a lot more holistic perspective and allows our design to work much better. That mobile and desktop separation is something that's hugely important. I'm sure anybody that's working with a direct response conversion funnel at the moment will understand when talking to a dev team and the dev team go, oh no, it's fine, it automatically optimizes to mobile, and you're kind of banging your head off the table saying, well, maybe that's not the best strategy to take. Maybe we need to consider mobile users as entirely different. And for us, it's very apparent that now we have a at work and an at home constituent group that can be separated based on the type of device they engage with us on. And that's hugely important for how we strategize in future. And without that as a user story, that would seriously hinder the way we design conversion funnels in future, not just for this perspective that we've worked on for obtaining donations, but for how we look at generating petition signups for our campaigns, or how we look at working with event projects and fundraising and peer-to-peer projects and everything within the broad sector of the charity sector. And it's super important for us, and it's something we're very keen to share with other charities as well, so everybody can operate on a really effective basis.
Which is good. So I think what we've really shown you here is a way of de-risking the process of optimization and testing and investment in testing and experimentation, and empowering organizational sort of experimentation mindset really, by using by giving confidence through data and customer insights. There's the sort of David Ogilvy quote, which I'm going to paraphrase a little bit, which is, your sort of analytics data is a bit, it's a bit like a drunk leaning on a lamppost for support rather than illumination, right? So, but give everything you can, invest in what you can from a research and insights point of view, because that will really give you a much fuller picture than your typical kind of audience and personal data that you're currently working on. Giving organizations the methodology and processes that they can use to really sort of not only drive those insights, but then translate them into experiments that are going to be successful and are really going to help to empower growth. And also making sure that you're able to accurately measure return on investment and be able to do that rapidly and at scale, so that you can align experimentation as an investment piece alongside other budget lines. And that's super important because, quite frankly, a lot of finance teams go, I don't understand that. No. So being able to give them something that's very quantifiable and results-based is super important. And will help to ensure ongoing investment whilst really sort of starting to cultivate a culture of experimentation, test and learn, not just within your digital teams, but within the wider business. So you're looking at product teams, you're looking at your sort of CRM teams, you're looking at every facet of your business should really be aligned with this type of experimentation culture, and also have shared objectives so that you're not working in silos and you're able to really start to grow the business with a singular point of focus around your customers. Thank you.
Right, bravo. Thank you very much, guys. I think that was really informative. I've actually got a couple of questions that have come in. So I'll let you guys decide amongst yourselves. But it might be more for Owen, to be fair. But first question I've got is, I think just what you've taken us through now is quite heavily focused on the acquisition side of things. Just curious to know, like, how does that apply or translate on the retention aspect? And how much of a focus is that for you guys at Shelter?
I would say, one of the things from looking directly at the donate page is a significant proportion of the people that are coming back into us are repeat donors, so they very much fall within that retention funnel. And we have certainly got evidence to suggest that people who have previously donated to us, have come back to donate to us, have then ended up not completing a transaction. So that's been part of a focus of that value proposition, and trying to understand, I guess, the difference in warmth and engagement based on entry point of traffic is something that's been a big focus for the later experimentation phase for us, because it is a case of saying this is not just a cold audience. At some point, there is a spectrum of warmth to this. A lot of that spectrum, like 35%, are people who have made a transaction with us before. So that's a consideration. It's always been part of the way we've presented value propositions. And I know Ash mentioned, from some of the direct consumer research, the value propositions were difficult. I guess part of the reason for that was trying to understand what level of pre-awareness somebody has when they enter that funnel. And that's been a challenge that I won't say we've fully completely resolved at this point, but we've definitely got to a stage where we're starting to understand who somebody is when they come in, what they're signaling and what their entry point indicates as to how likely they are to be a repeat donor, or how likely they are to be somebody we're aiming to retain, and how that functions for ensuring their transaction is successful there. From a longer perspective, what this is leading us to do is influence a broader understanding of what creative and what value proposition works. So when it comes to looking at retaining regular givers over a long period of time and producing regular content, that's allowed a lot of change there. We now know what level of, say, photography, what level of imagery, what level of value proposition is producing better conversion data. That can then be mapped across to what level of creative produces better engagement on a retention funnel. So what that has led to is something of a shift in I guess, segmentation. So understanding who people are, when we're looking at following up with them, understanding whether they need stewardship content, what type of stewardship content they need, how to grow a more engaging, not just piece of content, but more engaging functional piece of content. So obviously we now know that the way things are clickable, the way you can interact with them is quite significant. One thing that's led to is looking at the regular newsletters we produce that helps for customer retention over a long period of time, and moving away from things like issue, which are very much not clickable, and producing a more kind of content repository that people can scroll through and engage with and link out of and do all those type of things, instead of effectively a PDF or a magazine or something like that. So that's boosted, that understanding of the importance of functionality has boosted the methodology behind retention quite significantly. From a measurement point of view, we've seen that there is a constituent group that are regular givers that we also approach for cash appeals. That's increasing in value, despite decreasing in numbers because of GDPR and some various other reasons. That the number of people we communicate with is less, but the value and the money we're getting from it is much more, which is a good sign that this type of methodology has worked really well.
Great, thank you. Hope that answers your question. I've got one more, so just course of the time, so I just want to keep going on. Just want to make sure we get all the questions answered. Got one from Daniel, because this has been really insightful. Thank you very much. How did you convince stakeholders that testing should be used to generate insights and not every test needs to generate huge ROI? I think that's actually a very good question. I think it's probably something that gets commonly misconcepted about testing. It's always about money and conversion and revenue, but it's actually about learning. So yeah, curious to know how, maybe Osh as well, you probably work on this a lot as well for many clients. Yeah, so how does that convincing or persuasion process work for you with other stakeholders when it comes to testing?
I would say from our side, to be perfectly honest, we didn't. We got a lot of this done, a lot of the insight pieces done because we led with a very profitable piece of insight. We led with a piece of insight that produced an actionable piece of work that massively increased the amount of money we raised. And that became the banner that everything else, the Trojan horse that everything else came in under.
That in itself was enough to prove.
Exactly. And, you know, at some point, we start losing the goodwill of the original piece of money. So we have to go back to that well, do something that makes a lot of money. And then that allows us maybe three, four, five, six pieces of research that aren't necessarily profit focused. Mm-hmm. So it's all about managing the stakeholder priority. If you get dollar signs in somebody's eyes, then you've got a lot more compliant stakeholders. But yeah, I guess maybe Osh can add in experience of places that he's done these projects on where maybe money wasn't the key focus.
Yeah, I mean, there are kind of two core areas of positioning this. Is position one is you're able to see your immediate ROI. You're able to measure that. You're able to get a certainty of what is the average uplift we can expect from future tests. If we do one test a month, if we do two tests a month. But I think on the flip side of that, from a finance point of view, you can often say, look, the value of this change on a product page or this change throughout your conversion flow can be felt for the next 2 or 3 years. So you can look to amortize the cost of that particular piece of work over the period of time that page is of that page's lifetime. Typically speaking, though, I mean, it's really about a cultural shift. It's an understanding of we are. We're doing a lot of opinion-based stuff. Using gut feel. We're using our a lot of that sort of a lot of quantitative data to make our decisions, but we're not really seeing the results. We're not really measuring that very well, and we're not seeing a statistical significance on a lot of the work that we're doing. So there is a low value on that, and I think there needs to be an understanding of whether we have an agency do this for us or we do it in the house. We do need that sort of stewardship, upskilling of our internal teams. We also need and that's through stuff like a sort of methodologies, frameworks, processes that make this stuff a lot easier and a lot more automated. And I think also that relates not just to your marketing team, but it relates to your designers, your development teams, the way that you QA stuff. There's a lot that goes into a test. It's not just pressing a button, would that it were. But it's really about sort of helping organizations to understand what the benefits are of this type of experimentation culture and helping them to take those steps towards getting there. I hope that sort of answered your question. I realise.
Yeah, I think it definitely does. I think, Nick, you've got a 30-second answer to that as well, haven't you?
Yeah, so just a slightly different perspective on the value of, on convincing stakeholders on the value of getting insights from customers. The most powerful way of doing that is to get your stakeholders to watch live customer interviews, because that is a terrific way of challenging your stakeholder perceptions. But you don't have to do it. They're hearing it straight from the customer. It's not a question of looking at survey results or a PowerPoint presentation. They see it for themselves. Very powerful. If you can't do that, get them to watch the videos.
Before in a session with a client. We had a couple of those remote usability sessions, and I didn't have to talk for 15 minutes because the client was just like, "Can I just see this?" And I think often seeing a customer using your own products and services is fantastically valuable and a massive eye opener.
Yeah, can agree with that more actually. Great. Okay. Well, I hope that answers your question, Daniel. We've got all three experts answering that one for you. But course of time, so I think let's call it a day, wrap it up. And if you do have any more questions, feel free just to pop me an email. My email address there is just on the screen now. But yes, just thank you very much for joining. Hope it was insightful and useful to you all. There will be a follow-up. You'll get the recording of all of this. You'll get the deck as well. And then also, if you can, it would be very much appreciated if you can complete the survey, because we'll have to appreciate that many people might have webinar fatigue over the last few months. So it's important for us that we know how we can improve, make them a bit more engaging, interesting, and yeah, sort of do better for next time. So that would be really appreciated. But yeah, go ahead and enjoy your day. Don't melt. And yeah, hopefully speak to you soon. We'll be following up on each and every one of you just to sort of catch up, introduce yourselves and say hello. So yeah, on that note, I will speak to you then. So thank you all. Thank you guys. And yes, enjoy your day. Enjoy your week.